Good morning. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our event, Am I a Feminist? Addressing the Elephant in the Room. I'm Cindy Bishop, UN Women Goodwill Ambassador to Asia and the Pacific, and I am excited to be your host today for this event. If you'd like to post about the event during or after, please make sure you tag 342030 on Instagram or LinkedIn, and also use our campaign hashtags Elephant in the Room and hashtag 16 days. We have a quick Zoom poll for you to complete before we begin. So let's bring that up, shall we? Okay. So go ahead and just click on the responses you see on your screen right now. The first question is, do you identify as a feminist? Yes, no, maybe, sometimes, unsure. There's no right or wrong answer. It's just to get you kind of warmed up for what we have in store for you today. And the second question is, how are you feeling entering this event? Or how do you feel about the elephant in the room? And go ahead and click submit. And then we're going to have a look at some of the responses. All right. So pre-event, the majority of you identify as a feminist. Some of you are a little bit unsure. And most of us are curious, excited, and open-minded. Awesome. I love it. That's a great energy to have going into this, because this is definitely a topic that I think is long overdue. So the term elephant in the room is a metaphor for important or heavy topics, oftentimes controversial issues or questions that we have. We see it, it's huge, we can't ignore it, it's on everyone's minds, but nobody wants to discuss it. This is usually because perhaps it's controversial, it makes people uncomfortable, it may be socially, personally, or even politically embarrassing, it can be inflammatory or even dangerous to talk about. This year's theme, 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, our theme highlights a big elephant in the room, in fact, two of them. The first is femicide, and the rising anti-feminist sentiment that's making its way worldwide. We know that women and girls are being abused and killed at home now more than ever. And listen to the statistics. More than 5 girls or women were killed every hour by someone in their own family in 2021. I repeat, more than 5 women and girls were killed every hour by someone in their own family. Last year, Asia recorded the most gender-related killings of women and girls in the private sphere. Our region here has the highest percentage of women who have experienced physical or sexual violence by an intimate partner compared with the rest of the world. Globally, the average is set at around 27%. Over here, for example, in India, it's up to 35%, 38% in Timor-Leste, and over 50% in Fiji, Kiribati, Papua New Guinea, Solomon Islands, and Bangladesh. This is a horrific reminder that violence against women and girls is one of the most pervasive human rights violations worldwide. Here in my home country of Thailand, we have a proverb, and it says, "You can't hide a dead elephant behind a lotus leaf." So that's where feminism comes in. Whether you're aware of it or not, feminist activism has contributed to some huge wins for women and girls and people of all genders, including advocating for more women in politics and leadership, changing attitudes around sexual violence and assault, and also calling for the security of work, education, as well as a safe, just, and more gender equal world for all. While advocates of gender equality are mobilizing now more than ever, there has been a deep, pervasive, and really relentless pushback against our activism, and as well as increased violence against women, specifically against defenders of human rights and feminists. So while feminist itself is a complex concept, not all feminists think alike or even have the same ways to go about advocating. I've heard some disturbing and simply untrue convictions about feminism. A lot of people say that they believe in gender equality, but they stop short of calling themselves a feminist, which is confusing to us because it means the same thing, really. The definition is straightforward. Feminism is a belief in all genders' social, political, and economic equality. So if that's the case, I'm proud to call myself a feminist. Feminism, gender equality, and gender-based violence are the elephants in today's room. So we hope that we can help you to identify them, acknowledge them, and hopefully set them free. When we talk about how we can advocate for change and how we can perhaps attract the youth into joining in the movement, I feel like there's a lot of misconceptions around feminism that stop them or make them reluctant to join the movement. And so this event, and hopefully is the start of many more opportunities that we can debunk the myths around feminism. Today, the 30 for 2030 Youth Network bring together more than 20 feminist thought leaders from 13 different impact areas. We hope that you will take this opportunity to listen, to learn, and perhaps to be inspired to act. This is a safe space for everyone, and there are only 2 simple rules: be curious and be kind. By the way, the main rooms will be recorded, but not the breakout rooms. So in order to make sure that everyone is in a safe space for both the storytellers and also the conversations we hope that you'll be having. Before our quick game, I'm going to pass you on to Laura Lynn, a 30 for 2030 network member and 16 days campaign lead, to say a few words.
Okay, sorry, bit of a technical issue there. I hope everyone can hear me. Thank you, Cindy, for that wonderful introduction. A brief history of kids. Today are too soft. This is the title of a Twitter thread by a researcher from North America. From the oldest news article to the newest, he shares snapshots of how different generations, the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and so on, have consistently shared the same opinion about the youth of their time. Kids today are too soft. While his thread is very North American centric, the idea applies to Asia Pacific. In the eyes of older generations, we're too soft, and yet we're pretty resilient. We carry heavier burdens and face bigger obstacles. Thanks to COVID, we're still recovering from a collective trauma we simply weren't prepared for. Social inequalities have become harder to ignore. For many, access to education, employment, and healthcare is blocked because of the effects of the pandemic, political instability, a poor economy, and the climate crisis. All these inequalities contribute to an increase in gender-based violence. Our region is home to more than half of the world's population, and 60% of the world's youth come from this part of the world. Despite being a large part of the global population, we're not taken seriously when we speak up about injustices. We're often left behind at local, regional, and global decision-making tables because policymakers fail to keep us in mind. The majority of these people in power are rich, cis, heterosexual older men. Does that sound like an accurate representation of the people in our region? I'm based in Malaysia, and we recently held our 15th general election. It was disappointing to see exactly what I described earlier in many of the coalition photos. We make up most of the world's youth, but our voices are still drowned out. That's why the 30 for 2030 network exists and why we designed our first event for youth and the young at heart. This event is for you to rethink what is said, told, understood about feminism, gender equality, and gender-based violence. Today, you'll have the chance to hear 2 stories from a fantastic lineup of thought leaders. For the second story, I strongly encourage you to go into a breakout room that might make you uncomfortable. This is an opportunity for growth, and you might not get a chance to do this again in a safe space. For example, I'm so removed from what it feels like to be a rural woman, but I want to understand their perspectives better. While I might feel more comfortable choosing what I'm familiar with or what I'm passionate about, which is mental health or gender-based violence, this is an opportunity for me to learn. I won't take up any more precious time from our speakers and storytellers, so I'll let Cindy move on with a quick game.
Okay, great. Thank you. I can't unmute myself. Thank you, Laura, for that. All right, everyone, it is now time to play the privilege game. So in order to do this, can I ask everyone to put your hands up? Whether you want to show your hands or not is completely up to you. You can keep them hidden. You can maybe even just do the subtractions in your head. That is fine as well. So we're just going to go through, and I would like you to put a finger down if the statement is not true for you, or you can subtract a point if the statement is not true for you. Okay? Are you ready? Let's go. Put a finger down if English is my first language. I'm sorry. I'm going to say that again. Don't put a finger down. Only put a finger down if the statement is not true for you. Okay, I'm going to start again, guys. I'm sorry. English is my first language. One or both of my parents graduated from college or university. I went to college or university. I don't or didn't need a visa to live or work in the country I consider home. I don't or didn't have to work to support my studies. I don't or didn't have to worry about how to dress to keep myself safe. I feel comfortable holding my current or most recent romantic partner's hand in public. I never had my gender identity questioned. My family had free healthcare or a health insurance policy growing up. I don't have a visible or invisible illness or disability. I have a strong network of friends and family to turn to for support and advice. People have never assumed something about me because of a negative, generalized belief about my ethnicity, class, or race. I came from an emotionally supportive family. I feel confident discussing my personal beliefs. I never had people dismiss my opinion because of my gender, race, ability, or class. I don't know of an effective campaign to demonize any aspect of my identity. All right. How many fingers went down? How many of you didn't have enough fingers and you had to start using your toes? If you are comfortable, please let us know how many of fingers you had left, or any of you only have one finger up. A lot of you are saying, I don't have any more fingers left. How many of you were surprised or weren't surprised by the results? Not surprised, with a sad face. Yeah, these are basically just questions to get you to either recognize your privilege, which many of us have, or understand how there are, different overlaps of privilege and oppression that people face in a lifetime. And so this is just a great way to kind of set the tone for the conversations, hopefully, that you will have in the breakout rooms later on. So thank you very much for participating. And I think it's time to move on to my upcoming chat with two very special guests. So please settle in, get a coffee, get yourself a cup of tea. And it is now time to bring to the stage Dr. Elise Stevenson. Hello. And Nurul Mohammed Rashid. Dr. Elise is a 2030 Network member, a researcher, entrepreneur. She's also an LGBTIQ plus leader. She's an amazing all-rounder and one of our storytellers in the breakout rooms later on. And Nurul is a policy advisor on governance and peace and security for UN Women, Asia, and the Pacific. Simply put, she's been part of a team that supports women and girls in diverse communities to live a more fair and just life. Are you here? Yay! Hi, guys.
Hi, everyone. How are you? Hi.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us and chatting. I think this is a different conversation that we've had in the past. It's like we said, it's an elephant in the room. Everyone thinks about it or, has different perceptions of the F word, so we call it. But it'll be great to hear your views. So we're gonna, before we get to the feminism in general, today marks the start of 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. For both of you, how has gender-based violence impacted your lives, or how have you experienced that within your line of work? We'll start with you, Dr. Elise, please.
Yeah, thanks so much for the question, Cindy. For me, I really think of it as violence as taking many different forms. So on the one hand, it might be being afraid to walk home alone at night, or being catcalled in the street, or having a partner control your finances. On the other hand, online trolling is a big issue that a lot of young people in particular face, as well as other abuse or even physical and sexual violence that can result in everything from mental illness to death or disability. For me, I'll never forget about sitting in a workshop on gender-based violence about 10 years ago now when I was a student. During the workshop, it was actually only about 5 streets away from where we were sitting that a trans woman was murdered by her partner in her home. For me, it really reinforces the fact that violence against women is pervasive, it's normalised, and it affects all kinds of women. So no matter your race, disability, sexuality, country or upbringing, or where you come from, these are really pervasive issues, and violence affects everyone in our lives.
Yeah, for sure. What about you, Nurul? How have you experienced gender-based violence within your line of work or in your life?
Thank you very much, Cindy and the organizers for this invitation to UN Women. Cindy, since I was a prosecutor about 26 years ago, I have been working on gender-based violence, such as domestic and intimate partner violence that Elise spoke about, sexual violence in wartime. I've worked in Iraq and Libya, honor killings, online violence, and in this process, I have also met many courageous victims and survivors, and I have learned a lot about their own experiences and how to try and support and help the victims, particularly in wartime. Last year, the UN verified 3,300 conflict-related sexual violence cases around the world, and this is higher than in 2020. It's about 800 cases more. So it is truly a global problem, and no country is really immune from it. And yes, I also have close friends and family members who have experienced gender-based violence. So it is a very personal issue to me as well. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think majority of us here, if it hasn't affected us personally, it has impacted someone we know for sure. So that brings us to the elephant in today's room, which is feminism. What does feminism mean to you, Dr. Elise?
Yeah, this is a tricky question. I had to think quite hard about it. But for me, feminism is all about revealing the hidden power structures that exist in society and being able to challenge those power structures that might inhibit access or inclusion or leadership, representation, maybe it's safety or health or even well-being. At the Global Institute for Women's Leadership here at the Australian National University, we do a lot of work that focuses basically on this idea of not just fixing women, because we do see a lot of that out there in the world, that women need to be fixed, but rather looking at fixing systems. So for me, feminism allows us, all of us, to reimagine futures that don't constrain women to certain roles or men to certain roles. It allows us to reimagine and restructure government and business and community in ways that are just and fair and equal and sustainable. And really, right now, more than ever across our world, we are both more interconnected than ever before, and we know more about each other than ever before. So I think that this really gives us an opportunity. Feminism equips us with those tools and a responsibility to act in ways that create better and safer societies for all.
Well said. What about you, Nurul?
Because of my work, but also personally for me as a woman of color, existing in and working in very diverse communities, I have been playing and working with the term intersectional feminism. And that's really important because it centers the voices of those experiencing often overlapping concurrent forms of oppression, right? And we need to know this because we need to understand the various forms of inequalities that often exist together, and that sometimes worsen the experiences of discrimination and also marginalization. So that's a sort of a different angle, from Elise' definition of feminism, which I absolutely agree with as well.
So why is feminism more important now than ever?
Yeah, well, Nurul, do you want to take this one first, maybe?
Yeah, I think so. I think in this, the world is divided. We know that, it is very polarized. We've seen, polarization in politics and ideology and so on and so forth. But feminism is important because it allows you to walk in the shoes of others. So it is no longer talking about them, or those, or they're so unfortunate, these people, but it's about us. And it's about this single 8 billion human community that we're all a part of. We are so diverse, and at the same time, we are the same. So the slogan that you keep hearing, everyone should be a feminist, is sort of a way of life for me. And that will lead to a more fair, more just, more equal world that Lise has spoken about. For me, it serves as the framework. It is the lens through which we should be building inclusive movements. We should be working, collaboratively to solve the sort of overlapping forms of discrimination together. And I think it is a tool to correct the many social, sort of socio-political and economic imbalances as well, and the injustices that people are experiencing. It is truly a very useful framework for us to work with.
Yeah, for sure. We all know that when women are uplifted, empowered, and safe, everyone benefits. So what about you, Dr. Elise?
Yeah, I think for me, this one, it really comes down to, we often hear it said, okay, it's only a matter of time before we, achieve equality. And really, when we look at the data and the evidence, that simply isn't true. So from my grandmother to my mother, we're battling some of the same injustices around safety and representation and inclusion and all these other sorts of things. If you take a look at the World Economic Forum's current data on the global gender gap, it's some, 130, 160 years in the future that we will attain gender equality in our region. Now, I don't know about any of you, but that's too late, that is too long to wait. I won't be around. I don't think any of us will be around. So really, it's important now because progress is not linear and it is not guaranteed. And in many parts of the world, we have seen feminist backsliding. We've seen COVID that has had all kinds of issues on so many different people across the world. So really, why feminist matters now and why it is important is because, without it, then we risk falling further behind or things never changing. And ultimately, I think that we have a real golden opportunity now to reimagine kind of spaces and futures where we are all able to equally participate, have opportunities and live safely And I suppose we can do that at a micro level, you know, in our day-to-day life, or at a macro level, changing systems, government and business. So that's why it's important to me.
Yeah, I sometimes feel like we take one step forward and 2 steps back. And I have a daughter. We need to get this cracking.
Absolutely.
We're running out of
Absolutely.
time.
That's it.
So then, how has feminism benefited you personally? We'll start with you again. Is that okay, Dr. Elise?
Yeah, no worries. Yeah. So I think for me, honestly, I think, and just playing that privilege game before, I think I still had 6 fingers remaining. Like that is quite privileged. And I think that there are a lot of ways in which, firstly, I think using privilege to further cause and actually bring more people forwards is really, really important. But for me, feminism kind of benefits me, I suppose, in 4 core ways that all kind of have contributed to being where I am right now. So firstly would be around rights. So basic things from the right to vote to the right to education, and even to be able to get my PhD in a long human history where women and girls have often been restricted from formal learning. Secondly is access. So things like accessing consent education and proper sexual education in schools, accessing affordable healthcare, and even rights to property and land ownership. These are all really important rights. Thirdly is around safety, and what could be more timely with the 16 days of activism. So from redesigning streets to ensure that they have enough lighting, to buildings and making sure that they are safe, to working with young men around respectful relationships. Fourthly is around inclusion. So I come from a state that now has gender equal leadership in Parliament. Now, feminism really has helped me to be and remake spaces so that I can belong. So I think that rights, access, safety and inclusion are really important.
Amazing. Yeah, definitely. How about you, Nurul?
You know, I grew up in a family of 9 women, my mother and my 7 sisters. And fortunately for me, you know, all of us understood the value of education from early on. And so I've been privileged in that sense. You know, we grew up poor, but, you know, we had education, we had opportunities as well. For me, a feminist perspective is essential to my professional work at the United Nations, at the UN Women in particular, right? Because of all the values and the principles that come with a feminist outlook. It has definitely made me more comfortable speaking out on everyday injustices and to fight for more equal rights in my professional as well as my personal life. It has also given me a more solution-oriented approach to my life. Feminism has definitely given me more opportunities to advance to leadership roles, particularly at the United Nations. So yeah, those have been my experience.
So now that we've got a better idea about, you know, what feminism really means, how it has actually benefited and impacted so many of our lives, when we're talking about inclusivity, how do we just as individuals practice that? And it's easy to say, yes, we are inclusive, but sometimes when you look back or you just inspect a little bit closer, you realize, oh, maybe I could have been a bit more inclusive. So how can you give us a bit more examples of how we can really practice inclusivity with individuals from different walks of life? Can we start with you again, Nurul?
Yeah, no, I think, you know, because of the gender construct in our society everywhere, we are not born feminist, right? It takes effort. It's a lot of work. I'm working for UN Women. That's one of the hardest things that I've done at the United Nations. So I think the first thing to do is to get educated, read about the intersectional experiences of others. Start with the writings of, you know, some of the more really amazing writers out there. Watch, you know, TED Talks, watch UN Women videos on the same, learn about mainstreaming gender. What does that mean in your, you know, to do that in your professional work? Your own behavior, instinct, sensitivity in everyday situation, that's really important. Speak out whenever you can, when you see your LGBTQIA or woman friend being treated unfairly. Use your privileges. I think we all know instinctively when we have privileges that others don't. try and use the platforms that you have to try and elevate the voices of those who cannot. If you're a part of an NGO or organization, make sure that the staff is diverse. Make an effort to headhunt for talent in diverse communities. Your work environment should reflect your community. There are very few societies that are truly homogeneous in this world, and most countries' population, 50% women. So don't be part of, what I call a manel. It's now a UN policy. You should not be organizing a manel, a man-only panel, particularly when you're speaking about issues that will have an impact on women. Don't encourage stereotyping. Don't always gravitate to your own people, right? Get to know people in diverse communities through sports, social gatherings, seminars, and so on and so forth. So I think, do a lot of research. I think there are a lot of sort of movements and developments out there in relation to inclusivity and how you can actually recognize it, or not, or try to avoid, exclusion or exclusionary practices. There's just so many out there, and I think it's good for you to try and identify what they are and see what you can do about them.
So many ways, so many ways. Thank you very much for that. Dr. Elise?
Yeah, so I guess really building off what Narul mentioned, for me, inclusion is an active pursuit. So it is not enough to say, oh, I'm inclusive, or I'm feminist, or I'm anti-racist, or I support everyone. You actually have to do it, and that requires tangible action. And therefore, I think one of those first steps, as mentioned, was deep reflection on yourself and what are you currently doing? How do you currently operate in the world? And what are your relationships with others like? If you're in any position of leadership, that also flows on to your position within some sort of organization or community. I've got a few kind of tips, though, that I, pull out whenever people ask me questions like these. So one would be, anytime you're in a decision-making room or about to get together in an organizing group, look around the room, see who is not in the room. Think about, well, how can I advocate them and for them or their interests anyway? And how can I ensure that they're in the room next time? I also like this concept of unlearning. So we always get told to go and learn a lot, right? So learn more and absorb more information. That's really important. But we also have to know to unlearn things. So these might be things that we have grown up knowing as kind of just forgiven, right? So things that we just accept as being truth. So in Australia, for instance, our laws and our policies at times have been extremely explicitly exclusionary of people like Indigenous people, of migrants and refugees, of women from public office, and even young people from politics. So even when that exclusion is kind of cemented in law, that does not make that law right. So we actually have to actively commit to reviewing these ideas we take for granted and understanding why did they come about in the first place, and whose interests do they really serve. At times, this will mean you've actually got to change outdated laws or policies, but it's also about being open to unlearning ideas that you might have grown up and even kind of the respected wisdom of some of our elders, they're not always right. They sometimes have their own racism or sexism or other ideas that may be holding back their learning too. So do your own research and don't just rely on others. My final point would be around as young leaders. So as young leaders, I think it's also important, and actually this goes for old leaders too. It's important to know when to step out to let someone else step up. So one of my mentors was a director of a really big international organization and found that even though they had good gender representation in leadership, they had no First Nations or Indigenous women and no women of colour on the board. She ended up resigning under the agreement that the organisation would replace her and a number of her colleagues with some ethnically and gender diverse people for the leadership team. So that is a really tangible example, but to go a step further, you'd also have to have a think about, well, the current way that things are structured, whether that's in your local community or sporting group or business or government, actually, who is this inclusive of, and why might people not feel welcome or supported here? This means actively listening, like really just have your ears open to the experiences of diverse women and girls and other genders. Understand the evidence too, what actually works when it comes to inclusion. And then at the end of the day, there are so many different opportunities that you can follow. So improving your representation, having a critical mass of women, having people in positions of leadership, providing things like on-site childcare for parents, offering flexible or remote work, paying people properly, thinking about uniform design for sports teams, access to menstrual products. There are so many great ideas out there. And fortunately, resources like UN Women and universities and other researchers have done a lot of research to make that job a little bit easier, so that when you act on inclusion, you're also acting knowing that you have a lot of different options that you can take forwards.
Yeah, for sure. I love the part where you said not just learning about it, but unlearning and making informed decisions. I heard this the other day. If you are not proactively practicing inclusion, you will unintentionally exclude. And so, yeah, it's definitely something you really have to do practice with intention. So thank you so much, both Dr. Elise and Arul, for this really insightful chat, with sharing with us your experiences as well, and your expertise. I think that's a perfect setup for us to now go into the various breakout rooms, which you will have been pre-assigned based on your first choice in the form that you filled during the event registration. So in each of the 12 breakout rooms, you will get 60 minutes with 2 storytellers. With each storyteller, you will get 15 minutes of their story plus another 15 minutes that will be open up for discussion. So we really hope that you take this opportunity to engage, to share. After the first storyteller is done, you can then decide to stay or move to a different breakout room. All right, the rooms are now open. We'll see you back here in an hour. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed those sessions, or at least were able to perhaps gain some new insights, listen to some powerful stories, and have some engaging conversations. I know I did in the room that I was in. Before we move on to the next steps, we have another quick Zoom poll for you. So let's bring that up. I invite you to just go through the questions. How are you feeling exiting this event? How do you now feel about the elephant in the room? Do you identify as a feminist? And do you understand more about gender-based violence, having listened to the main event as well as participate in the breakout session? I'm just waiting for a few more to answer. But otherwise, most of you are feeling as similar to how we came in, which is curious, excited, and open-minded. 100% of us now identify as a feminist. Yay! And we definitely, most of us have now understand more about gender-based violence. Wonderful. We are also asking the admins of each breakout room to share some of the highlights in their session, please. And you can read that in the comments as well. As we are wrapping that up, I just wanted to share a reflection of mine, and that is, an elephant doesn't find its own trunk heavy. So the same goes for patriarchy and toxic masculinity. Listening to the stories today, listening to everyone share, I realized that, feminism actually and activism comes with a lot of baggage at sometimes and a lot of misconceptions as well. The fear is so deeply rooted that many supporters of equality don't want to associate with the word feminist or the word feminism or the feminist movement as well. But it's even worse for those that don't believe in equality in the first place. Myths and misconceptions help implant fear and hatred of women, men, and non-binary individuals who openly promote the concept of feminism. There's a saying that an elephant has round, flat feet in order to walk across lily pads. Today, we sat back in the room to peacefully prove how feminism can work towards a society based on justice and equality. It has been my absolute honor and pleasure to be your host and MC today. I will now be handing the floor over to Melissa Alvarado, Ending Violence Against Women Program Manager for UN Women, Regional Office for Asia and Pacific, and Laura Lynn to share a few words before closing this event.
Thank you so much, Cindy, and to all of the participants today, the hosts, the moderator, those of you who've joined and were part of the discussion and told your stories as well. I think we've got a huge number of takeaways from today's event, which we'd love more time to reflect on, but we're just going to perhaps share a few. And thank you to those of you who were taking notes about some of the takeaways in the chat. I see that some of you are posting some of those takeaways, so do have a look at the chat to see some highlights from the conversations that you weren't able to get to in some of the other breakout rooms. So I want to just say a few things in closing. We've organized this event on today, which is November 25th, which is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. Why did we do that? Why did we want to talk about feminism today? Because we're very clear, the evidence is very clear that in order to address ending violence against women and girls, we know that we need to address gender inequality, and that this, sort of fundamental belief that we are unequal and that inequality is okay or should be expected or should be excused is one of the drivers of violence against women and girls. And so we're here to have this conversation about feminism and gender equality, gender inequality, and how can we build a stronger, these societies and structures which are gender equal. And so we'll share a few points right now. They're quite practical about what we can all do to live our feminism. We've been talking about that throughout the event. Live our commitments to build gender equality. And so we're going to speak about, I'll share it here on some very practical actions to do that. So first, and this is, what we've been doing throughout our event today, is to speak up and speak out. We know that violence against women is pervasive. It's often excused or considered normal, but it's not inevitable. We can question the violence and we can question gender inequality when we see it, whether that's in our families, our communities, our workplaces, our communities of faith as well. We heard some good commentary today about communities of faith and how important it is to be talking with our community members in those communities of faith, as well as the leaders there, and to speak up and again, challenge inequality and gender inequality. We also heard a number of you speaking about the need to change institutions. Some of you spoke about how police are sort of systematically, consistently not delivering services that protect women in a way that's friendly to women's experiences and is sensitive to things like sexual violence and sexual harassment, whether that's online or offline. So where we have the opportunity to change an institution, to be part of the questioning of the institution structures, let us do that. Regarding violence against women, we also heard that for those of us who have experienced different forms of violence against women, some of us are not even aware that this is what has happened to us. But we know that there's many forms of violence. It can be physical, sexual, emotional. It can involve economic control. It can be public, private, or online or offline. And it's often a bit of a shock to us. And so for those who, if we know someone who's experiencing it, or we think that that might be something that they're experiencing, we can offer very clear support to connect survivors to assistance, to protection, and to just information to understand what's happened to them. We've heard a number of you talk today about the importance of challenging beliefs about masculinity that are harmful or toxic. We understand that toxic masculinity is one of the drivers of violence against women, and the acceptance of the idea that positive masculinity is a masculinity that promotes aggression, strength, and control over women. So we know we have to question that type of masculinity and support a masculinity that allows for sensitivity, empathy, vulnerability, and understanding that the more that we enable those types of traits, the more that we're going to enable safer relationships, healthy relationships, and relationships that allow us to share control and decision-making and power. In the end, it's about sharing power. On that theme of sharing power, another clear action we can all be taking is to support women's leadership. We've talked right from the beginning of today's event to the end about how we need to see and support women's leadership, women's representation, women's decision-making, and to create space there. And so we know that for those of us who work in institutions, we can push for that, to create space for women and women leaderships and diverse women's leadership, of course. I like that example that Elise gave earlier about, moving over and making space for other women, diverse women. And, some of us might decide that we need to be that women leader that we want to see that we are not seeing, and just take that brave step forward. Finally, we want to highlight the importance of building solidarity with other movements, with other feminist movements, with movements that are questioning inequality of many types, and building a approach towards gender equality. We need to be really working together to resist the rollback on women's rights, challenging patriarchy, amplifying the demands of feminist movements worldwide, and questioning violence and discrimination. So those are some very practical actions we can all be taking. I know many of you here are already doing that. And that is one reason why you're here, is to share strategies. So thank you all. I'm going to hand it back over to Laurelyn and appreciate all of your contributions to today's event.
Thank you, Melissa, for those closing remarks and those key takeaways, and what everyone can do as next steps beyond this event. I am deeply grateful to everyone, especially those who stayed with us throughout the event and had the patience to stick around with all the technical issues that we had. So thank you. To the 16 Days team, thank you for making this event possible with me. It's impressive that we can, to see what we can do when throwing ourselves behind a cause as great as gender equality. Many in the audience don't see how dedicated you all are. Some of you attended Zoom meetings, even though your country suffered from the worst floods. Others worked through leaking houses, constant power cuts, and other misadventures. To top it off, we tried to maintain our sanity while juggling personal and professional responsibilities. So everyone, please give a round of applause to the superstars in my team that you can see on the screen. By the way, the 30 for 2030 network is still open for applications. If you were inspired by the conversations, the stories that you had heard today, in today's event, and would love to be involved in what we do, our admin will share a link to the 30 for 2030 application page on UN Women's website. Speaking of UN Women, we also couldn't have made this event happen without the support of the Regional Office of Asia and the Pacific. We deeply appreciate you. Thank you for continuing to feed our ambition by believing in us and dedicating more resources at our request, even at the last minute. To our panelists and storytellers, Your decision to join us in lending your time, expertise, and vulnerability is an honor. I wish I could have cloned myself many times over to listen to all your stories, and I really do hope we work again in the future. Last but not least, I would love to take a group photo with everyone here, especially our lovely audience who are still here and were brave enough to confront the elephant in the room with us. I hope everyone can keep their webcams on for this photo. If you prefer not to be included in the picture, you're welcome to leave the Zoom meeting, as this is the last thing we do before ending this event. So I think, I'm not sure who's helping us with the screenshots and the gallery. Would that be you, Lauren?
Can I request Tom and Elma to take a big screenshot and not spotlight Sam and Laurelyn? So they get gallery view. Thank you. And count us down, please.
Okay, smile. 3, 2, 1. Hold on, one more. Smile. 3, 2, 1. Okay.
Thanks so much, Elma.
Okay, so that's it for our event. Thank you again for attending and having conversations with our storytellers. Goodbye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Great to see you.